Hello, welcome back to Cor Deo Online. And for our next season, we're going to be studying the book of Ephesians. And so this little video is really just an introduction to Ephesians, but also an invitation for you to join us if you're able to. We'd love to have you along for the ride, September and October 2020. We're going to be looking at the book of Ephesians together. So just a little bit of background, just to remind ourselves of this. Paul traveled 3 times. We've got the 3 missionary journeys in the book of Acts. On the second journey, he visited Ephesus in passing, but it's really on the third journey where he dwells, where he kind of sticks, if you like, in Ephesus, comes across from Antioch, across what we would see as Turkey, and comes to Ephesus, which was really the key city in the region of Asia Minor, and he stayed there for 3 years. Why would he stay so long? Well, this city was kind of the hub. And so all of the other cities, all of the other towns in Asia Minor would easily be traveling in and out. And so from there, Paul was able to teach and share the gospel and see many, many people come to faith in Jesus. In fact, what it says in Acts 19 verse 10 is so encouraging. It says that everyone in Asia Minor heard the word of the Lord. So he had a massive impact while he was there. And lots of story in Acts 19, and so you can read about the impact on the sellers of the little Artemis artifacts, if you like, the kind of little good luck charms that were being sold there. They rose up and there was a riot, and it's a very exciting story in Acts chapter 19. In Acts 20, we see Paul traveling on, and we get told that he was planning to sail from probably Corinth at the end of that trail to go back to Syria. But there was a plot against him, so he ended up traveling back by land. Now, because of the extra journey there, he didn't have time to visit Ephesus and kind of get stuck with the people. So he called the elders, and they came down to Miletus, and we get to read his really heartfelt, emotional goodbye in Acts chapter 20, before he then heads on to Syria and down to Jerusalem. A couple of things that are going on here that we need to be aware of when we think about the letter to the Ephesians. One is that on this third journey, Paul is really passionate about a gift from the Gentile churches to the Jewish church. It's a financial gift because of a famine in Jerusalem and in that region, but it was more than that. It was a gift representing the unity of the body of Christ. Paul was anxious that there shouldn't be sort of a Gentile church separated from a Jewish church. He was really wanting to bring this gift. And so as he traveled, he collected money, but he didn't handle it. He had others from these places travel with him so they could handle their own gift, if you like. And we'll see that in a second. And so Paul was anxious to get to Jerusalem to bring this gift there. The other thing, of course, is that once he gets there, he ends up being arrested. And so we'll come back to that more detail in a second, but essentially he goes to Jerusalem, is arrested, spends 2 years in prison at Caesarea, appeals to Caesar when there's a plot against his life, and then he gets transported to Rome, and there in Rome he's in prison for a couple more years, and that's when he writes to Ephesus. Actually, the letter to the Ephesians doesn't say to Ephesus in some of the early manuscripts, and so some people think that it was written as a circular letter, a letter that Tychicus, as he arrived in the region, could have a copy for the church in Ephesus, but then as he traveled on through Smyrna and Philadelphia and all those places, Sardis, he could kind of give them all a copy of this letter, because the letter wasn't specific to Ephesus. That is, Paul doesn't give details of people and, greet so-and-so, I love their cooking, none of that kind of stuff in Ephesians. Now, that's not to say that it's such a circular letter that it could be written to anyone anywhere. It was written to that region. Whether you accept that it was circular or specifically to the city of Ephesus, it was written to the people there, the people that Paul had ministered to. And again, 2 things. One, they were young believers, which means that the book of Ephesians, this letter that we're going to be looking at, is really like a beginner's manual to Christian theology. He's giving them the foundations of their faith. And so it's a fascinating book to read with that in mind. But it's also a book that's written with real sensitivity. There's a real tenderness about Ephesians, and I think part of the reason can be explained if we just advance the slide here and notice a couple of details. Okay, so Acts chapter 20, this is where Paul is heading back and traveling through the region, and we get some names named here. Verse 4, Sopater. Sorry, I crossed him out. Let me not do that. That's rude. Let me just change. Let me circle him instead. Sopater, the Berean. Okay, so Berea was on that journey. He's the son of Pyrrhus. He accompanied him. From the Thessalonians, again, that's a location that's on the journey. We've got Aristarchus and we've got Secundus. And then we've got reference here to Gaius from Derbe. That's on the other side of Ephesus from where they were at that time. Place where Timothy was from, of course. And then we've got this reference here to the Asians, Asia Minor, Ephesus. And we've got these two people, Tychicus and Trophimus. So these are some of the people that are accompanying Paul, bringing the financial gifts from their town to make sure that nobody is kind of, sliding money sideways to make one town look better than another. No accusations against Paul for, feeding himself off a gift that's for others or anything like that. It's just above board, careful money handling, entirely appropriate. And so this is the group that head on with Paul to Jerusalem. Now, in Jerusalem, we've got the temple. I just want to show you one little thing here that is kind of an interesting bit of backstory, if you like, a bit of detail that's going to help us. In Jerusalem, we've got the temple court there. You've got the Antonia fortress over to the right. You've got the temple itself. The courts either side of the temple would be the court of the Gentiles. That's where Gentiles were welcome to come to pray to the God of Israel. It's supposed to be a house of prayer for the nations, as Jesus said when he cleansed it. It became kind of a marketplace. It was mad. It was known as the Annas's Bazaar. Annas, the high priest's father-in-law, he was kind of a mafia don of Jerusalem, and he had this kind of marketplace mentality. He was making a fortune off of that. And Jesus, of course, went in and, upset everything there and cleansed the temple famously once, maybe twice in the Gospels. But I want you to notice something here. So we've got the court of the Gentiles. Then inside, in front of the temple, this area here, I don't know if I'm really making that any clearer by just vaguely colouring it yellow, but this is the court of the women. So Jewish women would be allowed in there. The treasury was in there. And then just beyond the gate was the court of Israel, where the Jewish men could go. Beyond that, just the priests. But notice something on the outside of the temple. We've got this wall here. It's sort of showing on the other side. It's not a high wall. It's just a low kind of a barrier. Now, we don't know exactly where that was located. This is a guess, but it seems like a good one, because it was the court of the Gentiles, but they were only allowed to go so far. So in excavations, they came across a little warning stone, kind of a signpost from the temple courts. And you can't really make that out as you look at it, but we've got the translation. I just pulled this off the internet, but it's pretty accurate as far as I'm aware. The translation on that sign says, "No foreigner," as in no non-Jew, "may enter within the balustrade around the sanctuary and the enclosure. Whoever is caught, on himself shall he put blame for the death which will ensue." So basically, if you're not Jewish and you go past this point, you're going to die and it's going to be your fault. Okay, so that's literally what the stone is saying. And so these were presumably placed along that barrier just as a kind of a warning, just to say, look, if you come past this point, serious consequences. The Jews were very, very ready to guard the holiness of their temple. Okay, now come over to Acts chapter 21. Paul is in Jerusalem. He's been there and kind of going through some rituals and so on. He's in the temple, and some Jews from Asia saw him there, and they stirred up the crowd. They laid hands on him, which is not a nice thing. They kind of grabbed hold of him, sort of citizen's arrest, I suppose you could say. And they cried out to the crowds of people around, "Men of Israel, help. Like, this is a legal situation. Men of Israel, help. This is the man." Now look at the charge against Paul. It's quite a cool one. This is the man who is teaching everyone everywhere. Remember, everyone in Asia Minor heard the word of the Lord. So Jews from that region, pretty upset. Everyone everywhere against the Jewish people and the Jewish law and this place, the Jewish temple. Now, of course, Paul wasn't really teaching against those things so much as teaching for Jesus. But for Jews that didn't understand or accept who Jesus was, he really was an antagonist to their faith. Now, notice this here. It says, moreover, not only is he teaching everyone everywhere anti-Jewish stuff, he even brought Greeks into the temple and has defiled this holy place. If anything's going to get the crowd worked up, it's that. How could they say that? For they had previously seen Trophimus the Ephesian. Recognize that name? They had previously seen Trophimus the Ephesian with him in the city, and they supposed, they hadn't seen him actually in the temple, but they supposed that Paul had brought him into the temple. All the city was stirred up and the men ran together and they seized Paul and dragged him out of the temple, and the gates were shut. The Romans had to step in to kind of quell the riot. And this is the point at which Paul gets brought into Roman detention. Now, with that as background, remember, Trophimus had done nothing wrong. Paul had done nothing wrong. Paul didn't bring Trophimus into the temple. That would be crazy. He wouldn't have done that. He knew very well the trouble he would get into. But because they had seen Trophimus with him in the city, they assumed that Paul must have brought him into the temple, since Paul was such a troublemaker, and therefore Paul was worthy of being arrested, and they're going to try to get him killed. Now, fast forward 3-ish years. Paul spends 2 years in prison in Caesarea. He then hears about the plot against his life, appeals to Caesar. Instead of being transferred to Jerusalem, he's transferred to Rome, and there he's imprisoned in Rome for 6 months, a year and a half. Whenever it is that he wrote the letter during those 2 years in Rome, he's writing the letter to the church in Asia Minor that surely would know that the reason he was arrested, the reason his ministry had stopped, the reason he was behind bars, if you like, was because of one of them. Trophimus, he's one of our own, they could say. But they would say it with sadness, because Trophimus somehow, through some misunderstanding, false accusation, something had happened and Paul had been arrested. I think that's the reason why not only is the letter to the Ephesians incredibly rich and helpful as a sort of introductory primer to theology, it's also written with an incredible sensitivity. And we'll spot that when we look at it. Paul's sensitivity to them because of their sadness over his imprisonment, their confusion, their perplexity, their guilt that they were feeling about why he was in prison, why he was in chains. And so he was able to write a letter to introduce them still more to their faith, but also to comfort and encourage them in light of the circumstances of his arrest. So there you have it. The letter to the Ephesians, we're going to get into it. We're going to look at all sorts of details in the text, the background and so on. But for now, just an invitation. Will you join us? Spend the next few weeks looking at Ephesians with us. We're going to have some gatherings online that you're welcome to join us for. Those will be recorded and available online to those who request the recordings. If you want to either attend or have access to all the recordings, please email us info@cordeo.org.uk, info@cordeo.org.uk. Join us as we study the letter to the Ephesians together.